Meet me on the softer side. Meet me on the softer side. Softer side of your heart.
Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books Author Reading Series. You can find out about this and all of our other author events at www.skylightbooks.com, where you can also browse our inventory as well as order books online. You can also follow us on Twitter or even be our friend at facebook.com. If you'd like to talk to a real person, we can be reached at 323-660-1175. And don't forget, Skylight Books depends on listeners like you to help support us. So whether you're in our neighborhood or browsing online, buy a book or two to help ensure that we'll be around for a long, long time. Thanks and enjoy. And about our event tonight, this is just a rare treat to not only have the author of such a truly amazing true story, but also the subject of that story here to talk to us. Our author, Mark Sundeen, is an award-winning writer whose work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Outside, National Geographic Adventure, McSweeney's, and The Believer. He's the author of the books Car Camping, The Making of Toro, and co-author of North By Northwestern, which was a New York Times bestseller. Sundeen was born right here in Southern California, graduated from Stanford, got his MFA from USC, and has taught at MFA programs at the University of New Mexico and Western Connecticut State. Since moving to Montana in 2005, he splits his time between Missoula and Moab, which was where 17 years ago? 19 years ago, he met the subject of tonight's book, The Man Who Quit Money, Daniel Suelo. Mark also just informed me that The Man Who Quit Money is, as of maybe today, Southern California Independent Bookstore Association bestseller, which is very cool and not surprising at all. So we're thrilled to have him back in Southern California to join us. Please help me welcome Mark Sundeen.
Thank you, Liz, and thanks everyone for coming. Let's see if I know how to work this thing. There we go. I have a bit of a dilemma, which is that for most of my career as a writer, I was really funny. I wrote books that made people laugh, and when I read them out loud, they would laugh, and I would feel like they were really listening and really enjoying it. And the next thing that happened was I wrote this book, which is actually kind of serious. It's this book about God and death and the meaning of life and money and the economy and the collapse. And I read it to people, and they just sit there and stare at me. So I want to let you know that if anything is even remotely funny, you can even imagine it being funny, then go ahead and laugh, and I'll appreciate that. Typically, I would probably read for 30 or 40 minutes, but as Liz mentioned, this is a special kind of event because the guy I'm writing about is standing right over there behind that shelf. So I'm just going to read maybe for 20 minutes or so and answer some questions. And this is now the fifth event that Daniel and I have done together, and we have sort of agreed that the questions that people bring to him and to me are a little more exciting and entertaining than listening to me read from the book. But I am going to read the first chapter and then take a couple questions, and then I might read a tiny bit after that, and then we'll have Daniel out and open it up. So I'm just going to start at the beginning, and my idea when I gave this book its title, actually the title was given to me by my fiance, Cedar, but I thought that it really kind of sold the book, right? Like The Man Who Quit Money, people are going to say, oh wow, what's that about? And then they're going to open it up, they're going to start reading, and there's going to be no introduction required. So here goes. In the first year of the 21st century, a man standing by a highway in the middle of America pulled from his pocket his life savings, $30, laid it inside a phone booth, and walked away. He was 39 years old, came from a good family, and had been to college. He was not mentally ill, nor an addict. His decision appears to have been an act of free will by a competent adult. In the 12 years since, as the Dow Jones skyrocketed to its all-time high, Daniel Suelo has not earned, received, or spent a single dollar. In an era when anyone who could sign his name qualified for a mortgage, Suelo did not apply for loans or write IOUs. He didn't even barter. As the public debt soared from 8, 10, finally $13 trillion, he did not pay taxes or accept food stamps, welfare, or any other form of government handout. Instead, he set up house in caves in the Utah Canyonlands, where he forages mulberries and wild onions, scavenges roadkill raccoons and squirrels, pulls expired groceries from dumpsters, and is often fed by friends and strangers. He says, "My philosophy is to use only what is freely given or discarded and what is already present and already running. While the rest of us grapple with tax deductions, variable rate mortgages, retirement plans, and money market accounts, Suelo no longer holds so much as an identification card." Yet the man who sleeps under bridges and prospects in trash cans is not a typical hobo. He does not panhandle, and he often works, declining payment for his efforts. While he is driven by spiritual beliefs, he is not a monk, nor is he associated with any church. And although he lives in a cave, he is not a hermit. He is relentlessly social, remains close with friends and family, and engages in discussions with strangers via the website he maintains from the public library. He has crisscrossed the West by bicycle, hopped freight trains, hitched nearly every state in the Union, hauled nets on a Bering Sea trawler, harvested mussels and kelp from Pacific beaches, spearfished salmon in Alaska streams, and braved 3 months of storms atop an ancient hemlock tree. "I know it is possible to live with zero money," Suelo declares, "abundantly." As it happens, I had met Suelo long before he gave up money in the desert outpost of Moab, Utah, a haven for seekers and dropouts. We ran in the same circle, worked a stint together as cooks, and squatted on public lands, not as a statement against something, but because we didn't want to pay rent. We had both gone truant from career paths because we were angry about the way the world was and had no means of changing it. If we couldn't overthrow the bastards, then at least we wouldn't enter data in their cubicles and buy junk in their big boxes and make monthly payments on their land crunchers. But over the years, we drifted our separate ways, geographically and otherwise. By the time I set out to find him again, we hadn't had a conversation in more than a decade. I had heard of Daniel's attempt to live without money, and I'd assumed he'd simply lost his mind. For my part, I was no longer an itinerant river guide living in my truck on $8,000 a year, but a professional writer, now and then passing through town to pull weeds and repair the plumbing at my rental property, a trailer on an acre of tumbleweeds whose market value had tripled in 3 years. Thank you very much. My one connection to the cave dweller was that he had friended me on Facebook. I'd seen him once in the intervening years, though. On a visit to Moab, I had glanced at a shaggy-haired, gray-haired man across the aisle at the market. We made tentative eye contact. He looked familiar, but could this old guy, gray in the muzzle, deep lines on his face and pants worn thin, could that be the Daniel I had cooked with a decade before? He smiled at me. The sight of his teeth, dark and crooked, rotting right there in his mouth, it chilled me. As much as I supported a person's right to voluntary poverty, here at the height of America's greatest prosperity, I drew the line at bad teeth. I should not be forced to look at such a sorry mouth. The sight made me ashamed of my own excellent dental condition, my disposable income, my rental property, as if he had accused me directly. My shame made me mad. It was a free country, I conceded. And Suelo had every right to sleep in the dirt and lasso grasshoppers or whatever. But how dare he sit in judgment of me? By now I had recognized my old acquaintance beyond doubt. But I did not take his hand, offer my friendship, ask about his health. I didn't even say hello. My jaw tightening, I threw him a nod and escaped to my car. The truth was, I'd come to like money. In fact, I'd always liked it. When I was a boy, I counted and recounted the coins I collected in a tin can, packing pennies and nickels into paper rolls and depositing them at the bank, greatly satisfied as my fortune grew on the passbook. I also liked what money represented, the entire system of trade and credit and saving. As I grew up, money served me well. I started getting paid to do what I wanted, like writing books. Money allowed me to test my wits, to save, to gamble, to win. Even in my days of living in a tent, the act of saving money allowed me more freedom. And now, when I hunted for a used car below Blue Book value, or refinanced my house at a lower rate, I felt like I'd outwitted the system. After surviving well into my 30s with only the possessions that could fit inside the bed of a pickup, I began to reap the rewards of my pennies saved and pennies earned. I acquired a second car and a second house. Okay, that first one was the single wide. I contributed to a retirement account and filed 53 pages of tax returns in 3 different states. I possessed 6 pairs of skis. Then came 2008. $20 trillion in world assets were incinerated by bad mortgages and speculation. The real estate bubble splattered into foreclosure and bankruptcy, taking down with it the pensions and savings and jobs of millions of people. My paltry retirement account became 50% paltrier. Magazines that employed me furloughed their staff or shut down altogether. Budget cuts would eventually eliminate my college teaching job. Suddenly, that big monthly payment on my home didn't seem like money well spent. I could paint all I wanted, but no number of trips to Home Depot would make the house worth what I paid for it. Those naysayers who forecast that my generation, born in the 1960s and 70s, would be the first in America's history to be worse off than their parents, maybe they had a point. Suelo, meanwhile, had gained a little notoriety, thanks to stories in Details magazine and the Denver Post, an interview with the BBC, even the pages of Ripley's Believe It or Not. His blog and website got tens of thousands of hits. As I pored over the writings he had compiled from Thomas Jefferson and Socrates and St. Augustine, I began to think about the choices he had made, bad teeth and all. He was someone who had said all along what the rest of us were being forced to contemplate. Money was an illusion. He said, I simply got tired of acknowledging as real this most common worldwide belief called money. I simply got tired of being unreal. Daniel had opted out entirely, rejected what I had pursued. I wondered whether, apart from everything he rejected, there was something he embraced. What was I missing out on? Finally, I decided to drive back to Utah and find out for myself. I returned to Moab. I was staying with friends, a married couple. I had exchanged a few emails with Suelo, but we had failed to make a plan. Of course, he had no phone, and apart from any question of cave etiquette, was it okay just to drop by, I didn't know where to locate him in the vast wilderness. I sent an email, then sat back and hoped that he wandered out of the canyon soon and logged in at the library. A day passed. It was fall. The air was sunny and cool and crisp. I sat on my friend's porch, sipping a glass of fresh watermelon juice. One of my hosts, her name was Melanie, that's her real name, Melony. She considered watermelon a wonder food, filled with antioxidants and electrolytes and vitamins. She swore it had cured her of a 5-year illness that no doctor, medication, or allergy panels could solve. And she drank the red potion 3 times a day, stuffing rinds, seeds, and everything into a blender. But with the harvest over and both markets in town sold out, she was running low. She was contemplating doing something desperate, like ordering them on the internet. Another day passed, and still no word from Suelo. And then, as I sat on the porch checking my watch, an apparition appeared. A bicycle was approaching, dark mount, dark rider. Horn-rimmed glasses emerged between gray hair and beard. The rider wore a black felt bolero cinched under his chin, with a stampede strap held snug by a tin brooch. His gaze was forward, serene. Although his legs were pumping, his body gave the impression of utter calm. As he pedaled toward me, I made out a plastic crate of apples and oranges lashed to the rear rack. I would not have been surprised had he let go of the handlebars, picked the fruit from the crate, and began to juggle. I rushed into the street and called, "Daniel!" "Oh, it's you," he said. For a dude who lives in a cave, Suelo displayed a positively keen sense of style. His trousers were a few inches too long, cuffed with rolls above boxy workman shoes. A plaid flannel over a tight black t-shirt revealed a slice of trim belly above a leather belt. He looked like a cross between a Great Depression hobo and a vagabond French painter. Buster Keaton meets Paul Gauguin. Unsure what to do next, I threw my arms around him in a clumsy hug. He smelled like wood smoke. I invited him inside and introduced him to Melanie and her husband Matthew. She poured tall glasses of watermelon juice, the last of her cash. Suelo perked up. Above his right eye, there's a scar that causes his brow to rise, and a sharp peak, giving him a perpetual appearance of intense curiosity. "Do you know about the melon patch?" he said. We didn't. "That field between the creeks," he said. "There's hundreds of melons over there. Watermelon, Crenshaws, squash, pumpkins. I've been eating them for months." "Whose are they?" I said. Some guy." He said, after Obama was elected, he thought the whole system would collapse, so he planted his fallow fields. But the end times didn't come, so he left everything to rot. Matthew and Melanie and I followed Suelo out of the house and onto the street. He pushed his bike along the paved road until it turned to dirt, leading us to a field nestled between 2 creeks, a green swath of desert farmland that had survived from pioneer days. Someone had planted all kinds of trees and vines that grew out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food, peach trees, pear trees, apple trees. Only the serpent and the naked lady were missing. And there were hundreds of melons, a cornucopia, some tucked green into the rows of thistle and tumbleweed, others already yellow mush swelling in the sun. Suelo cradled a sound one like a baby and thwapped it with his thumb. We wandered the rows, tapping and listening. Suelo picked up a melon the size of a pony keg, raised it overhead and heaved it down, and it burst at his feet with a whump. He knelt beside it, scooped up the flesh, and lapped it from his palms. And then, verily, he fed our multitude. Wordlessly, Matthew and Melanie shoveled watermelon into their mouths as the syrup dripped toward their elbows. I buried my face until my nose bumped against rind. We busted melons open, one after another, some putrid, others green, some delectable. It was cool and dry and sunny, and the sandy soil was wet after the first big rain of October. The field was ringed by cottonwoods exploding in yellow like a million kernels of popcorn. Beyond the trees, the red cliffs bore down, and above them the snowy peaks thrust through a ring of clouds into the blue sky. We all ate and were satisfied. The number of those who ate was 4. Looking across the fields, we could see that Matthew and Melanie's house stood just 100 yards away, a literal stone's throw from this Eden. It seemed truly mystical, that unfindable, moneyless Suelo had materialized from the ether and led us across the desert to Melantopia, to the abundance. Matthew and Melanie and I filled our arms with melons, hoarding them like eye gadgets we'd liberated from Best Buy after a hurricane. But Suelo chose only a single small green fruit. He lowered it into his crate and silently pedaled off. That's the end of chapter 1. Anyone want to ask a couple of questions while I just think about reading another 2 pages? Just give myself a little break here. Anything come to mind off the top of your head? Yeah.
This may be off the sort of thrust of your book, but in Moab, I'm just curious, I've been there for many years, there was a big pile of uranium tailing.
Yep, still is. Oh, no, I think they moved it, but go ahead.
They moved it? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's been a 20-year process. They were putting it on a train and taking it somewhere else.
They're starting to move it.
Yeah, it's on the banks of the Colorado River, which of course supplies most of the water for LA.
Where are they moving it to?
Just like 30 miles away, they're going to bury it.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything else? Someone's got to have a question. I'm just going to...
You still own that house?
Yeah, I still own the trailer. In fact, I was there yesterday morning, and we just drove out yesterday. Yeah, I'm going to read a couple pages here, and then we'll bring on the questions. Our whole society is designed so that you have to have money, Suelo says. You have to be a part of the capitalist system. It's illegal to live outside of it. He has a point. Our national identity is enmeshed with the idea of private property. Our right to it is enshrined in the 14th Amendment, which guarantees that we not be deprived of it any more than our lives, liberty, without due process of law. The flip side of this protection of property holders is a lack of protection for the property-less. Suelo has defied these laws. His primary residence is a canyon near Arches National Park, where he has lived in a dozen caves tucked into sandstone nooks. In the fall of 2002, 2 years after quitting money, he homesteaded a majestic alcove high on a cliff. Its sculpted mouth was windblown into smooth symmetry. Sitting inside and gazing into the gorge below felt like heralding himself to the world from inside the bell of a trumpet. His grotto was a 2-hour walk from pavement, and believing he was unlikely to be disturbed, he settled in for the long haul. He chipped at the rocky ground to create a wide, flat bed and lined it with tarps and pads and sleeping bags that had been left out with someone else's trash. He stacked rocks to block the wind and built wood-burning cook stoves from old tin cans. He learned to forage for cactus pods, yucca seeds, wildflowers, and watercress that grew in the creek. From dumpsters, he stockpiled dry goods like rice and beans and flour and sealed them in plastic buckets. He drank from springs. He bathed in the creek. He washed his clothes by weighting it overnight with the river rock, dried it on hot sandstone. In warm months, he left a note when he was away. Feel free to camp here. What's mine is yours. Eat any of my food. Read my books. Take them with you if you'd like. Then one day, after several years of peace, a ranger arrived to evict him. Suelo had long since violated the 14-day camping limit. If I were hiking along here and I saw this camp, said the ranger, I'd feel like I wasn't allowed here, that it was someone else's space. But this is public land, and you're making a high impact here. Suelo said, who do you think is making a higher impact on the earth? You or me? The ranger wrote a ticket for $120. Well, I don't use money, Suelo said, so I can't pay this. The ranger felt conflicted. He'd spent years chasing vandals and grave robbers through these canyons. He knew that Suelo was not harming the land. In some ways, Suelo was a model steward. The ranger offered to drive him to the next county to see a judge and resolve the citation. The next day, this penniless hobo and federal law enforcer climbed into a shimmering government-issued truck and sped across the desert. The ranger explained why he had become a land manager, to stop people from destroying nature. And then someone like you comes along, he said, and I struggle with my conscience. They arrived at the courthouse. The judge was a kindly white-haired man. So you live without money, he drawled. This is an honorable thing. But we live in the modern world, and we have these laws for a reason. Suelo hears this all the time, that we're living in different times, and however noble his values, their practice is obsolete. He even heard it once when he knocked on the door of a Buddhist monastery and asked to spend the night, and a monk informed him that rates began at $50. The Buddha himself would have been turned away, Suelo observed. We're living in a different age than the Buddha, the monk told him. But Suelo simply doesn't accept the distinction. Whether today or 2,000 years ago, he believes that public spaces are for the public, and he need not ask permission to occupy one. When a policeman asks what he's doing as he hitchhikes into town or pulls a pizza from a dumpster, he says, "Walking in America." It resonates with cops, Suelo told me. A lot of them are very patriotic, many are veterans, and they understand that every citizen should have the right to walk in this country. To the Utah judge casting about for an appropriate sentence, Suelo questioned the purpose of the 14-day camping limit. Does it have anything to do with justice or protecting the environment? No, it's to keep people like me from existing. Daniel offered to do jail time or community service. I don't think jail would be appropriate, said the judge. Like the ranger, the monk, and the many cops who meet Suelo, the judge just didn't know what to do with someone who refused to abide by one of our culture's most basic premises, the use of currency as a means of exchange. Finally, he said, "Well, what do you think you should have to do?" Suelo suggested service at a shelter for abused women and children. They agreed on 20 hours. Suelo volunteered regularly at the shelter anyway. So the punishment was a bit like sending Brer Rabbit back to the briar patch. And within a few weeks of eviction from his grand manor, he'd found a new cave, this one a tiny crevice in which he would never be discovered. Thanks. So let's see. Allison, question?
I was looking at the back of the book, and it says that the genre is biography/nature. But while I was reading it, I know the subject is Daniel, but so much of how we understand Daniel is this your analysis and the way you shuffle between romanticizing him and also being quite skeptical about the way he lives his life. And I wonder whether in any of your discussions it's popped up to what extent the book is autobiographical.
Yeah, it's very autobiographical, and it's kind of like this book that I had wanted to write for years, but didn't know how to, because as I mentioned in that first section, these ideas about living a more fulfilling, spiritual, less materialistic, less anxious life are ones that I'm really interested in and always have been. But I didn't want to write an essay about this, sort of abstract, like, so, philosopher A proposes this and philosopher B counters with this. Nor did I want to write a memoir in which I just talked about how I'd failed at living up to my ideals. I thought that was a little too depressing. But then, the most magical thing happens that someone who actually embodies these ideas that I've always been interested in, walks upon the scene. And so his life story tells the story of this debate, in a much more interesting way. And by setting myself up as, the narrator who's in there saying, oh, this guy's disgusting, he needs to go to the dentist, we have a person representing each point of view. It's like there's me and there's him, and there's this big gap, and there's places where we agree, and there's places where I really admire him, and so that to me made it much more interesting than an abstract essay. It's like setting up two characters who've diverged, because we did actually live almost exactly the same way in 1993, and then by 2008, I was like, 2 houses, 2 cars, and 6 pairs of skis, and he was in a cave. So it's like, what happened? Yeah.
I guess my question is which time in your life were you happier, and how has your interaction with Daniel affected how you relate to the monetary lie we agree upon?
Well, which time in my life was I happier? It's a good question. I think that, like a lot of people, it's pretty fun to be young and to not have any responsibilities. But I know that for all of that time, I always sort of dreamed about being better at what I do and actually committing myself to my craft as a writer. And now I'm actually doing that, so that's really fulfilling. So the answer to the first question is I don't know. What was the second question?
How has your interaction with Daniel affected how you relate to the monetary?
Oh, it's just been so shocking to be really conscious of how often you talk about money and how often you're thinking about money. And something Daniel said today, how often you see something, oh man, we could make a lot of money if we were to do that. Or, someone says, well, I've decided to quit my job because I don't need the money anymore. Or I'm moving into a bigger apartment because I got a raise and now I have the money. And it just infiltrates every layer of conversation. And that in itself is not a bad thing, but I started to think, wow, I'm spending 50% of my waking hours crunching numbers in my head. And I don't know if I want to do that. And so it's one thing to be aware that you're not living the way you thought you were or you intended to, but it's another thing to turn that ship around. It's a very slow process because I'm not ready to go to the cave. And so I take small steps, but as I get into later in the book, it's actually kind of embarrassing how small the steps are. When you could contrast it with someone who's sort of done this almost mythical act of renunciation going in the desert, and here I am saying, okay, I'm going to wash the Ziploc and reuse it because I don't want to contribute to the swirl of plastic in the ocean. Or I'm going to take my money out of Wells Fargo, I'm going to put it in the local credit union. So I did that. I felt good about it, but it didn't exactly make me less dependent on money. It made me just more aware of what was happening with my money. Yeah. Anything else? All right. Yeah.
I know some of these books you've done, Daniel hasn't done.
Yeah.
Are they different in nature when he's here versus when
Yeah, they're much more interesting when he's here. They really are.
I was just wondering if the audience asked more pointed questions than
Well, we're about to find out what the audience will ask, but surprisingly, we've only done it 3 times so far, but there's this incredible amount of knee-jerk. Well, that's a bad way of putting it, but instant hostility. If you go and read a blog that's talking about him, people have like I did when I saw him, and that hasn't come out yet in a face-to-face meeting. What's been most surprising, I guess, is the degree to which people have asked extremely deep spiritual and religious questions. And well, Daniel told me that before the book came out, he'd spoken to some classes in college and stuff, and the questions were always so, how do you brush your teeth, and where do you go to the bathroom, that kind of stuff. But whatever, having this forum of a book event, people have just been asking really theological questions and philosophical questions, which of course Daniel really likes to answer. But anyway, why don't we just bring him out? And Daniel Suelo. All right. Anyone have a question that they want answered by Daniel himself? Yeah.
Since we're in a bookstore, and Mark mentioned that you have some books with you wherever you may be living, have there been any writers that have influenced, how you came to live the way you live, and any thinkers that, anyone at all, who has influenced you, intellectually or just?
Well, I would say the first, did everybody hear that question? I would say the first, I was raised in a very religious, fundamentalist Christian family, so I would say the first one was Jesus, in the Bible. That was a big influence on my life, of course. It's my roots. And as I grew older, left home, I started finding amazing similarities among all the religions, like the same principles. The Tao Te Ching, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Quran, and I was also very influenced by Gandhi, Gandhi's experiments with truth, and the movie Gandhi, and Henry David Thoreau, and list goes on, but yeah, that's basically, yeah.
Do you think that somebody without religion, without faith, could do what you do for as long as you've done it?
I think so. I think it's the same motivation. It's just different vocabulary. I think that nature in itself is faith, and you might use a whole different set of words for it. But I like to use the language of religion. That's what I was raised in, and it's part of our culture, and I feel like it opens doors. But I think that anybody who goes out into nature and realizes the non-judgmentalism of nature and the balance and the beauty and the balance between conflict and happiness that's just there, it's like you feel something. And to me, that's a religious feeling. So.
Two-part question. Where was the phone booth that you left your wallet in? And what was going through your mind as you walked away?
The phone booth, I believe it was in Pennsylvania. I was with a friend, Lorelei. We were both thinking we were going to live without money. We started in Nova Scotia, hitchhiking down the East Coast. And I remember leaving it somewhere on the East Coast, and I think I told Mark Pennsylvania, because I'm pretty sure that's where it was. But when I started out in Nova Scotia, I had $50 in my back pocket, and that was my little insurance policy. And I thought, I'm going to live without money, but I have this money to fall back on in case something happens. And, and I'm with a friend. I'm not doing this by myself starting out. She's thinking the same thing. She had a little bit of stash, too. I think she had a little bank account or something, but we both agreed that we weren't going to use money. And, and we were quite elated on the whole idea, like in visions of a moneyless community and like a traveling tribe. But I kept finding myself with these feelings of anxiety, like, wow, I'm out in the middle of nowhere, and I'm away from family and friends back home, and I must be nuts. And what kind of crazy person does this kind of thing? But I kept finding my mind going back to my back pocket with that money, and it kept going back there. And Then later on, my sister said that she reminded me I had a parking ticket I left with her in Seattle. And so I decided I'd take part of that and send it to her, and the rest I left in a phone booth. Because I realized, wow, the money is my source of anxiety. It isn't helping it, it's creating it. And because my mind isn't in the present, it's on that. And as soon as I left that and walked out, it was this total feeling of liberation. Like I describe it as warm water pouring over my head. It was just like, and then this feeling of total comfort, like, it was like this realization, I'm at home. It doesn't matter where I am. I'm at home. And the whole universe is my employer, so I'm not ever without employment. It's like, how can I leave the universe? And it was a indescribable feeling for me.
You seem to have a mentality that's really geared towards seeing the abundance in the world. And I wonder if part of your success and survival has a lot to do with that, and if someone who didn't quite have that mentality would do so well.
She said that she feels like I have I like to see the abundance in the world, and that if you have a mentality that's not like that, maybe I wouldn't be so successful if I didn't have this abundance feeling. And yeah, I agree with that. It's the universe can be how we see it, and the nature of the commercial system is not abundance. It's wealth, but not abundance. But there's this idea like you have to work hard for what you get, and if you don't, you're going to starve. It's like there's this feeling of fear, and I don't see that in nature. Like I think Mark might have put this in the book, but I wrote this in a blog way back when, or a letter, I can't remember. Watching a spider or a daddy longlegs, and this was in the late winter. It was just starting that day in Moab. It was like spring. The sun was coming out, but it was going to get cold again at night. And it kind of dawned on me. I was watching this daddy longlegs walk out of the cave, and I followed him for a long time just to see where he would go, for like hours. And he went clear down to a lower canyon, and finally, like hours later, and it was going to be dusk soon, he crawls into another crevice. And I thought, to me, that's faith. It's like, okay, he has no possessions. Who knows if he can even see totally where he's going. He doesn't have any guarantee of food, like by our standards of guarantees. And then you look at animals all over, and they do that. It's like they carry nothing with them and go out. And how does nature function this way? It's happening everywhere, all the time. And look at us. It's like we're so afraid to, go out the door without a coat or whatever. Like, what happened to us? And and I'm still not totally at that point. Like when I think of Peace Pilgrim, she was way that way. I don't know if everybody's heard of Peace Pilgrim, but she didn't carry anything. She didn't carry a backpack or anything. I still have my backpack and whatever. But yeah, it's that's the way nature functions. The reason there's scarcity is nature's balance of positive and negative. If you take too much, you're going to create a balance of too little over here. when we're running on worry and scarcity, then we hoard. And I often hear, and this is kind of it's like the new so-called abundance religious mentality. You often find it like televangelists type stuff, and you find some in other new religions or new agey feeling, is that, well, we're meant to live abundant life, so we accumulate, stack up. To me, that's not abundance. The only reason I would take more than I need is if I'm living in fear and scarcity. And by my taking more than I need, I'm creating deficiency somewhere else. The United States sucks the world dry of resources, and our lifestyle is creating poverty in the environment and the rest of the world, because it isn't the abundance mentality that we think it is. And you can see it on people's faces. There's so much worry and stress and depression in this country. That's not abundance. Abundance is taking only what you need and relaxing in the universe as it is. Anyway.
I'm just curious, like, if you could, I mean, I love the point, thinking about how the money was such a preoccupation for you and all that. If you could imagine a situation not where you were rich, by which I mean a conventional sense of having a lot of money, but if you were simply allowed to live, like, it sounds like you appreciate nature, love being out in nature, but you, if I understand correctly, and I've only learned about you what I've heard tonight, but it sounds like you've picked a very extreme, way to live, like in, I would imagine, relative solitude and off the beaten path quite a bit. If it weren't a matter of money and cost and all that, would you still choose to live where and as you live, or would you prefer to have, something, I guess, with more people around in a more, more of a for lack of a better word, human community, more creature comforts, or is that not something that you think about, desire, or what?
Yeah, those are really good questions. Like when I first started doing this, I was more solitary, more of a hermit. I'd stayed in the cave for a week or two at a time, and then come into civilization and maybe socialize, find food or whatever, and then go back out. In the last several years, I've become more of a socialite. Like, I have a camp near town, and I like to spend a lot of time. I'm kind of a townie, and people ask me to house sit too. So I, like last winter, I got really soft. I house sit like most of the winter, but I never ask for house sits. I don't advertise for it. I'm in a small town, and it's word of mouth. But a lot of people have this impression that I do this to be self-sufficient and to be a hermit. But really, it's just the opposite. I feel like the way our commercial system is set up, it creates isolation and loneliness and walls between people, even though we can have thousands of people together. It's like, how many of them are lonely, and what's the deal with our society? And it's not necessarily, my life isn't really about, I'm not a anti-technology, Luddite, whatever. I feel like everything is a part of nature. This is a part of nature, and the floor of the building. And yeah, I feel like if there was a way for society to live in community and share all of these things rather than possess them individually, I would prefer that. And I feel like our technology, our possessions, everything would come into balance if we changed our thinking. We share, do the things we learned in kindergarten. We share, we give without expecting in return, like freely give and freely receive. And I feel like the system of pay it forward is the system of nature. You just watch animals, plants, anything in nature, and do you ever see any two creatures haggling over anything, saying, if you give me this, I'll give you that, or keeping tabs? But it's like it's all pay it forward. It's like you watch a bear eat berries from a raspberry bush, and the raspberry bush doesn't say, okay, now you owe me. And the bear doesn't have any sense of obligation or debt. He just like enjoys it. He's like eats his berries and walks on. And then you think, well, how does this raspberry bush get what it needs in return? But that's the point. Why ask how? It happens. It's like as soon as we take on this consciousness of credit and debt, which I interpret the whole idea of, like the Eden story, our fall from grace, is taking on consciousness of credit and debt, knowledge of good and evil, and value judgments. This is good, this is evil, this is valuable, this is not. When we let that go, and this is what all the world's religions teach at their core, is giving up the idea of the fruit of your labors and just trusting and doing out of your heart rather than to get something in return. Not out of ulterior motivation, but out of the truth of your heart, like being real. If I'm real, I just do for the sake of doing, not to get something. It's, you could call it love. And if we just change our thinking and have this trust that positive is going to balance out with negative, that's the way nature is. Why do we have to keep tabs on it? Then it balances by itself. And I really feel deep in my bones that our system, our civilization, could function very well in balance, just like nature does, if we realize it is a part of nature, and nature will balance it in this way. It's this pay it forward thing. And we all do it all the time. It is our true nature. And it's not even like we have to create a separate utopia, or we have to think of a future millennium or a past Eden, but it's all present. It's like everybody's already doing this now. It's just a matter of cultivating it. We all have neighbors right now. We're loving everybody but our neighbors. But it's like, just like I like to think of a classic suburban neighborhood. Everybody has their own house, their own washing machine, sewing machine, lawnmower, tools. But what if all the neighbors like decided, wow, why don't we get to know each other? And why do we all have our separate things? We could share them. Not only would it create community, put some smiles on faces, but it would also reduce consumption, and we'd stop sucking the world dry of resources. So yeah, I would really like to envision a society. I don't think it's practical for everybody to go live in a cave, but for me it's my little step, and it's something that I really enjoy. Not everybody can do that, but I feel like everybody can share, and everybody can take on these basic principles of nature. In fact, we must, if we're going to survive as a civilization. I'll take you next.
I was wondering to what extent you see yourself as a role model, and whether you thought that was going to happen at the beginning of this process, and whether you feel any kind of obligation about it, or your feelings about it.
Yeah, that's a good question too. Whether or not I felt like maybe I was a role model, or if I feel a sense of obligation. And yeah, and this has been, like, especially when this book thing or the publicity started happening, I thought, wow, now I have to live up to something. Or it's like this idea, like, because I feel like most of the time I just hang out, I don't really know what to do. But and then I look at nature. It's like I look at birds and whatever, and it's like, yeah, they're my role models, but they're not conscious. Again, it's that whole consciousness thing. It's like, I just feel like if we're all ourselves, we're role models. If we try to be, then we mess things up. It's the same thing as trying to do that balance act. When you try it, you stumble. But when you trust it, it just happens. And I have to sit with that every time I think, oh man, I have to live up to something, or I have this obligation now that I didn't have before. That's that consciousness of debt coming back in, obligation. And so I sit with it and let it go.
Yeah, have you thought about how people can live the way you are within the city? I kind of came back to Los Angeles many years ago because I care about nature in the country so much, and I just don't think everyone should move out the countryside. It won't be the countryside anymore, and it'll be ruined.
Yeah.
How we can live in dense situations with inexpensive real estate and so on, simpler.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was hitting on. Like, not everybody can go live in a cave, but I feel like I just have this gnawing feeling, or deep feeling, that everything we need is always in the present. All of our answers are here and now. And when we start thinking, wow, future utopia, or way over there it's better than here, or the past was better, or something, then it whacks us out of balance. But I do feel like we can begin cultivating what's already here, like the idea of sharing with your neighbors, like go back to our own neighborhoods and say, hey, maybe we could, let's see if we could get some kind of system going here, like a tool bank or something. Like, everybody already has them, and we share, or the washing machines, or cars, like carpool or whatever, little steps. And some people really want to get out of the city, and maybe their thing is to go to an intentional community. There's lots of intentional communities around that already have models like that. But I don't know, it's like, I don't really have all the answers, but those are little steps that I think of, and I think that, like, you all live in the city, and I think if you put your minds to it, it can be figured out, Let's see. Did that answer your question?
Say also, you probably heard people say that what you're doing couldn't be done by people who are not, a more or less young single male, in other words, family life, people with small kids, or older people.
Yeah.
They just couldn't do it.
Yeah, that's why I say, everybody has to take the steps that they can. There are people living in communities that, like, virtually moneyless, that have families, and I feel like in that situation it would work. And when I think of, like, right now, there's a woman, Heide Marie Schwirmer. She's in her 60s in Germany. She gave up money. Her life is quite a bit different than mine. She doesn't sleep outdoors. People share their houses with her. She house sits, and she has trade groups. Her philosophy is a little bit different, and there seems to be kind of a movement like that in Germany. And then there are intentional communities all over the world where people can go experiment with these things. But I don't know. It's complicated. I will admit that it's, I can't give easy answers, but I feel like we can make steps. But thanks.
Can I give the answer?
Yeah.
So, I've been doing a bunch of radio interviews for this book, and I've been getting asked that question a lot, as to, well, what if everyone lived like Suelo? What if everyone, lived in a cave and dumpster dived? And they say, they got some really good points, like, what if, who would cook the food, and who would process the food, and who would ship the food so that it ended up in the dumpster? And it's a really good point, because a lot of our systems as we know it certainly would not survive. I mean, there would be no more stores as we know them, for one thing. But so I've been wrestling with that question as I was writing the book, and as I was finishing up the book last year when Steve Jobs died, and I was reading all the tributes and the biographies and the articles, and because I was sort of obsessed with my own work, I was thinking, hey, how come no one's asking, what if everyone lived like Steve Jobs? You know, what if everyone just invented computers? Like, who would grow the food and process the food and ship the food and raise the children and, you know, clean up in the hospitals and all that stuff? And so finally I realized that it's kind of, I guess, a rhetorical question, because no one could ever live like anyone, right? I mean, the whole world could never follow a single model. And more often than not, I find that question is asked, certainly not by you, but I found that question is often asked as a way just to sort of discredit Suelo. People say, hey, wait, well, this wouldn't work for everyone, so the guy's full of it, and I'm not going to listen. But the answer that finally arrived to me was what if everyone lived like me? Because, you know, I have a car that I drive around by myself, and I live in a house that I heat with gas, and I put out trash on the curb every week. And I just got back from India, and I realized, you know, we're 5% of the population. If all 7 billion people lived like Americans on this planet, the systems would actually collapse even faster than if everyone was living like Suelo. So that's worth thinking about when we think it's that it's one or the other. You know, there's got to be somewhere in between. And our current way of living, to me, seems unsustainable, and it seems like there's a consensus among scientists, at least the ones who are not being paid by the oil companies, that we are in fact living unsustainably. Yes, you. That's my mom.
It seems to me that what you're describing is kind of the philosophy that a lot of communists had, and I guess still have. And I know that you visited a lot of communes, I think hoping that you might find a place to live in there, and they had just gone. They had just disappeared, and the people weren't taking the responsibility for the land they were living on. Or in one case, they completely abandoned the property. Do you know what causes these to fail? Because it seems like with your idealism, if you had a group of people who had the same value system, it would really be a solution. But what made these fail? Do you know?
Well, a lot of them are still functioning. They've been functioning for like 30 or more years, very successfully. The one I visited in Nova Scotia, what attracted me to it was they didn't use any money and they were off the grid. Somehow they were able to not pay taxes or anything. And that was I went to visit them. I couldn't contact them, of course. They had no email or phones, and I get there and the whole farm is abandoned. And they'd been abandoned for almost a year. It's like walking into a Stephen King novel. It was just like a house with broken window panes and curtains blowing and doors creaking. But later I got the story. I talked to people who had lived there, and at that time I hadn't realized there were rednecks in Canada too, but in that part of Nova Scotia there were a lot of rednecks in the area, and they just harassed them constantly, and they finally had to just leave. They were like plowing through the land with their ATVs and shooting guns. Through their went in when everybody was gone, took their wood stove and threw it down the well, and stuff like that. But ultimately, after I visited several communities, some were very successful and some weren't, but I realized that wasn't my path. I wanted to live in society as if it already is a community like that, and kind of like Gandhi, the saying you hear from Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. And not only do that with myself, but live in the world as if it is how I want it to be. And cultivate the giving and the grace I already see in people all around me. And there's some who have, their path is different. They want to create a separate community, but it's all good. But this is just my particular path right now. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on the Old Testament idea of Jubilee and forgiveness of debt
Yeah, she asked if I have any thoughts on the Old Testament concept of Jubilee and the forgiveness of debt I think it's every 7 years and every 49 years, like 7 times 7 years. Yeah, that's a concept that I feel like our society could really get a good dose of. But in the first place, in the world's major religions, Judaism and Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Islam, interest debt is forbidden. And it's like the idea is you lend to your friends and family and you don't charge any interest. And then on top of that, you forgive debts every 7 years and every 49 years, and you give land back to where it came from. So it's like there really isn't even any possession of land. Everything goes back. And like I really feel like a bank cannot be forgiven and can't forgive because it's a non-human entity. I feel like, well, that's a whole nother tirade I could go on, but yeah, this is a really amazing concept that I find in Judaism of not only every 7 years, but every 7 days. It's like we were talking about a no money day, or quit money day. Is the day after taxes. Was that the April 18th? Yeah, everybody quit money on April 18th for a day. But we think of that as a big radical concept, like one day in a year or one day in a lifetime. But really, and this wasn't just Judaism, it was a lot of ancient cultures had a Sabbath. And the Sabbath, the idea of the Sabbath was no money transactions this day. No business. Everything shuts down every 7 days. And it kind of evolved into this idea of this meaningless regulation, no work. But it didn't necessarily mean no work, but no work for money. And the idea, and you find it in the Old Testament, it's like the seventh day and the seventh year and the 49th year were meant to let the land rest, to let poor people and animals and wildlife take freely from your land. And if this wasn't practiced, it was considered it was a very strict law. It had major consequences if it wasn't practiced. And we think of it as like, oh, this angry God in the sky is going to send brimstone down on us if we don't practice this. But the idea is that it always goes back to the poor and the wildlife. It's like, how is the earth going to survive if we don't give it a rest, at least? Just like, how about we take 1 day a week and see what life is like before money and commerce? And, the whole idea of grace, if we live in this society where it's all commerce and law and legalism, maybe we can take one day and set it aside and see what happens if we give up commerce. And and then this went into the New Testament, and I feel like Christians today still don't grasp that concept. Like there's the story of Jesus' disciples going through the fields, gleaning food to eat. And the religious Pharisees say, "Hey, you're working on the Sabbath. Why are you working on the Sabbath?" And it's like they'd forgotten the old Torah, which said the reason you leave your land to rest on the Sabbath is so poor people could glean and animals could glean. It's like, give the rest of life a little bit of space. Why don't you? And and that was the point of it. But they'd missed the whole concept of it. Anyway, that's a whole that could be a long discussion too. But,
so I was telling my friend about you, and he said that he thought it took a stronger person to be spiritually grounded and down to earth and in our monetary system than the way you live. So, and that in that way you deprive yourself of some, joys of life and ambitions and things that you might want to do. So my question is, what do you think of that? Is there anything in your life that you wanted to do, interests or things that you feel like you can't do because you've chosen this? And do you think that you could live, just start living on money now, a small amount, and be the same person and have the same values?
Yeah, those are good questions too. I don't know did everybody hear that? Like her friend made a comment that it would take a stronger person to be spiritually grounded and live within the monetary system rather than almost like escaping it. And this might be the easy way out. And I've often thought that. I've thought, I don't necessarily believe money is evil. I feel like what it represents is something deeper. It's that consciousness of credit and debt thing that I'm talking about. Money itself is just a symbol of that. And I know people who can work jobs, paid jobs, and enjoy their job, and they're not thinking about the rewards, but they get them despite that. And I think that's a valid and good thing. And I will admit I'm not very capable of doing that. And that's one of the reasons I live this way. And why should I do something that tempts me to be otherwise? The whole idea of living this way is to live without ulterior motivation, to be true to myself. And at this point, I don't see anything that could substitute for that I would like better. And I don't really I've made no vows. I don't really believe in vows, but I don't really see any reason in going back to the money system for myself. But I don't disrespect somebody who's, obviously not everybody can do it. We've been talking about that. And the point of living this way is to not want anything. Like I wouldn't be telling the truth if I said, well, I want this or that I can't have now that I could have had living with money. To me, the hardships in life aren't what we're lacking physically or the circumstances that are happening now. The hardship happens when we think about what we could or should have. Discomfort isn't in the present moment. It's in thinking of what could be or should be more comfortable. So it basically comes down to our thinking. And we think that our happiness is dependent on these things when it's really in our thinking. And we've really lost that concept in our materialistic culture. And I feel happy that living this way can put a spotlight on that idea. And that's part of why I do this. I don't think I would be up here talking with you all if I lived in the money system. Maybe I would. I don't know. But maybe it would take another avenue. But anyway. Yeah, you.
Are you happy, and why?
Well, that question, I always say it depends on when. Like right now, I'm happy. Sometimes I'm not. Like in the next moment, I may not be. And I feel like that's also the point of living this way, is to accept things as they come, and my own moods when they come. Like sometimes we get the idea that a spiritual path is being happy all the time. I feel like it's being content all the time, content with unhappiness and content with sickness and health and joy. So yeah, I would just say it depends on when you ask me. If I compared overall my happiness now compared to in the past, I would say, like whenever I start complaining, thinking, wow, why am I doing this? I must be a nut. Or I get stressed out about some little thing. Then I think about what my life was before I walked away from the whole commerce system, and I'm way happier now. It's like the stresses and unhappinesses that happen now, I feel like are natural, whereas before they were overwhelming and unbearable. Stresses and unhappinesses are part of nature, and they're a good thing. I think we all need conflict as well as comfort all the time. It's like you can't eliminate the negatives from nature. The negatives and positive, they have to be in balance and dancing continually, and that's the point of living this way. And yeah, they're manageable. They're in the present. Whereas before, it's like how often are we thinking about, wow, what am I going to do for retirement? What about my bills and my Social Security, getting old? I don't know. When our minds are not in the present, that's a worse. Like worrying about what could happen or should happen is a worse illness than what actually will happen. So, anyway, let me get someone back there. I'll get you there.
One more question.
One more question? Okay.
2 more questions.
Oh, 2 more. Okay, and you'll be next. Okay. I think so. Like any time I go through a big change, I get really vivid dreams. I think when I first started doing this, I had really vivid dreams, and but it's hard to say if they're that much different than before. Yeah, I think I do dream more, and I remember dreams more now than I did. But before I did this, I also was dealing with severe depression, and I didn't remember dreams at all, or everything just seemed like a nightmare. But Yeah, you.
Thinking a lot about work, and as a writer, you work hard, and there's not necessarily monetary exchange there.
Mm-hmm.
But I was just thinking about what makes a gratifying day if you're kind of off the grid and days. You're hunting and gathering, not to work. What's I guess the meaning of work, or like the most gratifying day? What's a great meaningful day? Without that part of stress, what calibrates,
That question just totally ruined it. I'm like, no. Well, I feel like that's another value thing that we do. We have this idea of this is work and this is play. I think about when I was a kid. It's like we'd go to an orchard and pick apples, and it was the funnest thing in the world. And then when I got older, one summer I picked apples for money. And I was like, wow, this is no fun. And it's like, when you're doing something to gain a reward in the future, your mind is no longer there with it, and it's no longer fun. And you're thinking, wow, my fun is somewhere in the future. And it's no longer play either. And I guess that goes back to that idea of not working on the Sabbath. We think that means no activity, but all life would cease with no activity. It's like work is just the nature of physics. It's everything works. But it doesn't seem like work until we're working for some future reward. Then it makes life this misery. And we do that with our religion. We think, someday I'm going to go to heaven. If I do enough, I'm going to get all these rewards later on. Instead of the original idea that the kingdom of heaven is at hand, which is what the spiritual teachers of all the religions meant and taught. And then it gets turned into this, I'm going to do some penance or I got to do penance for past sins, and I have to work for future rewards, instead of this idea of grace that everything is right here. The reward is in doing. And then there's then the distinction between work and play, it vanishes. And we even see that in nature. Like if you look at nature flicks on television, I think most of them are very beautiful, but it's like commercial civilization's propaganda gets in there, and you listen to the soundtrack and the music, and it's like, oh, life is dreary, or it's a struggle for survival, and and these animals are plodding along, but when you go out in nature, you see struggles and you see play and joy, and why isn't it this oppressive feeling that you get in these nature flicks? It's like we have this egotism, this civilized egotism. Wow, we have the better way of life here. Let's show how bad it is out there, so we can justify our way of life. But yeah, I just don't see it. Like I see a beaver building a dam, and the beaver knows when to quit. He isn't he doesn't work himself to death, And we don't know when to quit, and we all know it. It's like we work more than we want to, and I feel and we think that that's somehow righteous or a good thing. We're working ourselves to death. We're working our earth to death. Why don't we just follow our hearts? And you feel that if somebody's doing something for you, you don't want them to do it out of obligation. You want them to do it out of free will of their heart, then you enjoy receiving it. But when you turn everything into this guilt and debt thing, anyway. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget that you can check out this and all of our other great podcasts at www.skylightbooks.com. Today's music was provided by Fragile Gang. You can check them out at MySpace, Facebook, and the iTunes Music Store. Thanks for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.